Yep.
Okay, thanks everyone. Let me call the August 2021 Atherton Rail Committee meeting to order. May I have the roll call, Robert?
Sure. Chair Kay,
Here?
Vice Chair Malbeck,
Here.
Jack Ringham. No, not yet. Greg Conlon. Not yet. Paul Jones.
Here.
Jim Jans. I think you're muted, Jim.
Yeah, I'm here. I talked to Greg Conlon earlier. He should be here.
Great.
That's the rumor.
Jim Massey.
Here.
Great. Then our liaison hasn't joined us yet.
Watch me.
Okay. Any public comments?
See this microphone?
Seeing none, we're moving on to
Hold on
item
just a
3.
second. We
Okay.
have
It's working fine,
we have Vice Mayor Lempers joining us.
Okay.
Vice Mayor,
Welcome,
we just
Mike.
finished roll call. We got you on.
Okay, so no public comments. Moving on to the item 3, approval of minutes. So any comments or corrections to the minutes from June? Hearing none, can we have a roll call? Oh, I guess a roll call vote on.
We need a motion first.
So moved.
Yeah, can we have a motion? I'm sorry. I haven't done this in a couple of months. Can we have a motion for the minutes?
Yeah, I have Jim Massey as giving the motion. So we need a
Okay.
second.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Paul seconds.
Cool.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed or abstentions? Okay, unanimously approved. No presentations today, so let's move on to the regular agenda. The election of the chair and the vice chair, which we do every year. So I'd like to open up for any discussion or any nominations for chair. And then once we do the chair, we'll do the vice chair. Paul?
I'd like to nominate Alec Kay for chair.
Thank you, Paul.
I would second that.
Jim seconds. I guess we can, any discussion before we proceed to a vote? Seeing none. All in favor of voting for Alex for chair, say aye.
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 Any opposition or or abstentions? Hearing none. We'll move on to vice chair. Any nominations or discussion of vice chair nominations? I'll nominate John Malbush if John, you'll accept the nomination.
Sure.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any other comments? Hearing none. Can we have all in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? Seeing none.
There we go.
John, congratulations.
Thank you.
Alec, congratulations.
And the same to you, Alex.
Thank you, John.
We're turning into a dynasty here.
Yeah.
They have told me it's a lifetime appointment.
I noticed that my term on the committee, the terms were assigned by random selection. And this is my last year unless I get reappointed.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to reapply.
Okay.
For any of the 3 open positions. Moving on to 5B, we have the Atherton Caltrain station closure update. So Robert, can you fill us in on anything?
Sure.
here?
Thank you, Chair. So a little bit to report with regards to activities since our last meeting. So the first item to report is that there was a chain link fence that we worked with Caltrain to install at the end of Maple. They installed it. It was a little too close to the edge of the roadway, and we worked with them, and we were able to have that relocated behind some of the vegetation, which gives us a little additional clearance for maintaining the road and little extra side clearance and some potential planting area. And so that work was done. Caltrain, as indicated in the previous meeting, hired HNTB to initiate the design work for the 4-quadrant gates at the Watkins Avenue crossing. They've started their activities associated with it. One of the first things that is on the list is a diagnostic meeting with the CPUC. They've requested the meeting, but that has not yet happened. Once that's scheduled, we anticipate to be invited to participate in that meeting, and we'll keep you informed on that. Their schedule calls for completing their preliminary engineering report by the end of next month. And so by the time we have our next meeting, we should have additional update, and we're looking at actually inviting Caltrain to the next meeting to provide a presentation on where they are at that point.
Okay, will that include a cost estimate at that time, or they're just?
I think, I'm not quite sure if they'll have the cost estimate at that point. It'll be just the preliminary stuff. They may have an order of magnitude cost, but it's our assessment along with theirs that the funding that's been approved through the TA is going to be sufficient to cover the costs of putting in the 4-quadrant gates. And then the last item as an update on this is that we have come to an agreement on the finance agreement between the Transportation Authority, the JPB, and the town, which provides us with the $400,000 that we will have for improvements outlined in our MOU with the JPB, which includes addressing the station building and site and looking at alternative pathways to the Menlo Park station. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Once the design is all done and approved and signed off by the CPUC or whatever has to happen, is there a separate construction contract, or does Caltrain build it themselves? How does that work?
They will likely hire a contractor to implement the improvements.
Is there a sort of a target end date for the whole thing being up and swinging?
Yeah, so as I think we discussed previously in our MOU, it's the end of 2023 is when it's supposed to be installed.
Okay, so there's kind of a long gap when really nothing happens, because it doesn't take 2 years to build a thing.
Well, they need to design it, and so the design will probably stretch through some point in 22. They'll have to hire the contractor and get it installed. So, I mean, we're all hoping that it'll get installed before the deadline, but at this point, go ahead.
I misunderstood. I thought that this thing that was happening over the next couple of months was a design phase. Is this just to develop the specifications?
Well, what they're doing initially is the preliminary engineering design report. And so that's going to get them to probably around 30% over the next couple of months. And then following that, they'll move forward to complete the full design package, design and construction bid package.
And that will take a year. Huh?
It'll take some time. I don't have the schedule in front of me. They did provide me with their preliminary schedule. I can forward that to you all following the meeting.
Yeah, that would be good if we could all get that.
Hey, Robert, is the money solid? I mean, we're talking about through 2023. Are we sure that there'll be funding it's set aside somewhere? Is there any chance it could disappear?
That's the funding agreement that we have, that the 3-party funding agreement with the Transportation Authority. So that's been executed. So the money is there from the Transportation Authority. I think it's 4.2 million that's going to Caltrain to fund the station closure activity.
And that doesn't matter what year it's finished, that 2023, 2024, we still get the funding?
Yeah, I think there's like a 4 or 5 year term on the funding agreement, but as long as the expenses are related to the project, it should be reimbursed.
Thanks.
Yeah, I believe that funding was initially to be spent on improving the Atherton station for preparation of everything for electrification and such. So instead, they redirected the money to the quad gates. So it's not necessarily an additional expense that the TA necessarily had to bear, but it's just a shifting of what they were going to spend it on to, because the station's closing, they can now spend it on the quad gates. And John, just to answer your question a little more, end of 2023 is when they're contractually supposed to finish. They can, of course, finish sooner, but whether they do is, we will see. So
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
they're busy guys, they got a lot of stuff going on, but
they do.
I mean, I've watched them build power plants faster than this.
It's a new day, John. It's
Not
a new
really
day.
big power plants, but
Do you remember how long it took to put the quad gates in at Fair Oaks?
well, it took many months, but it didn't take years. I don't think. Well, I don't know. I probably wasn't involved in observing how the schedule until they actually had trucks out there moving dirt. So, but from the time that started, it was what, 6, 7 months, something like that. It was originally supposed to be 5 weeks, but it kind of.
Okay.
Okay. I do want to say, Robert, good job on the movement of the fence back. It looks much better now that it's been moved back because it blends into the vegetation
Mhm.
much better. So good job with your team on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item before we move on to the Caltrain update?
Yeah, I got in late because I had technical problems, but I wanted to mention that San Jose got some special funding to do quiet zones. And I just wonder whether that funding is available to us to accelerate the safety issues at Watkins. You are
So we actually have the funding already from the TA set. So I don't believe we need any extra funding. Once the estimates of how much it actually costs come in, and if it turns out to be less, which it's likely because it's 4.2 million and change, I think, because I think they're also looking for some grants that they think they'll get. It should not cost that much. That would be a very expensive quad gates.
Well, each of the quad gates in Orange County, there are 11 of them, cost $1 million each.
Yeah. So if they only cost $1 million for us, or 2 million, we've got another 2 to 3 million to spare.
Well, the funding would only accelerate the timing. I assume that funding is critical on the timing also
Well, the funding's in place.
Yeah, the funding's in place.
at TA.
Yeah. TA's already approved it.
And we're just waiting on the design, or?
Yeah, so as indicated, they've started the design process. We're waiting for the diagnostic meeting with the CPUC. That'll happen and it'll feed into the preliminary engineering report that'll be used to move the project forward through design.
Because they spent $1.5 million earlier on engineering. So I don't know whether that went to the trash can or whether that's being used and improved.
Okay. So why don't we move on to 5C, Caltrain update.
Sure. So included with the agenda were a number of articles that we had sent following the previous meeting with regards to delays and cost increases related to the electrification project and their new target date of 2024 to get the electrification project completed. Additionally, there have been continuing dialogues with regards to the governance issues and potential changes at Caltrain. Since those articles, there's been some movement in terms of discussion between the various entities and funding that may be owed to Samtrans related to the purchase of the right-of-way. So that seems like it's going to be able to move forward. With regards to activities related to Caltrain, Balfour Beatty has been out and doing work here in town. They are continuing with trying to get things set with regards to the communication facilities at the different crossings. And so when I talked to them out there this week, they were getting set to do some boreholes at the Fair Oaks Lane crossing to get communication lines across the crossing with the street. So that work is continuing. With regards to an update in the segment that were included, about what we have from Caltrain is about 95% of the foundations within the segment are complete, and 21% of the poles have been installed. And so they are basically working, they're going to be working their way down the segment to continue the installation of the poles. And they anticipate that they'll be in the town standing poles sometime around September or October. So that's the update that I have currently with regards to the electrification project.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions or comments?
Is that September, October this year or next year?
This year.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question. Is Caltrain still digging in to get San Francisco and Santa Clara to pay what they owe? 'Cause they
Yes,
had a
as
couple meetings canceled.
Yeah, so as I indicated, I think that there's been some correspondence between them. It appears that the majority of funding that would be coming would actually be from the MTC, but there are some remaining funds from both San Francisco and it's either Santa Clara County or the VTA with regards to
Yeah,
a balance.
And my concern is not where the money's coming from, just that we get paid back. San Mateo County gets paid back for what they put out years ago to make this happen.
Yeah, I think
So
San
it sounds
Mateo
like it's on
County,
track then.
I think the TA is keen on getting the balance of funds back.
Great, thank you.
Samtrans sent a letter to the other two counties asking about the debt, when that would be paid. And so they had a meeting, one of their meetings that in protest, some of the San Francisco and Santa Clara representatives decided not to attend, so that they lost a quorum and couldn't undertake that meeting. I think it was about a month or so ago, sort of in protest. Yeah, so they're gonna have to figure out, that's one of the things San Mateo County wants, is to figure out if they're gonna give up governance shared equally, whether they get some of the funds that they put up back so that they would be made whole again.
Yeah, it's been all these years. I don't know, Paul, what's it been, 30 years? Something like that, before they bought they paid for the right of way from Union Pacific for Santa Clara County and San Francisco. It's taken all this time to get the money back. And now they want to do a shared governance. I think San Mateo County would be idiots to let San Francisco into this pot. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. John, did you have something?
Well, you said that the San Francisco and Santa Clara used what I call the Texas strategy for stopping something from happening. Was that a JPB meeting that they boycotted?
Yes. There's 9 members on the JPA, and there's 6 of them, or 3 each for each county. So if 6 of them leave,
Yeah,
Well,
that kinda
all you need is 5 to leave, you lost the quorum.
kinda kills the
Actually,
quorum.
just like our committee, 9. You need 5 for a quorum.
I see. So if you guys start doing something that I don't agree with, I can just get a couple of people and we'll go.
That's right.
Yeah. Does anybody, Alex, do you or does anybody on this committee regularly attend JPD meeting?
I used to, so did
Go ahead,
Paul.
Greg.
I'm sorry?
I used to, but I haven't recently. And Paul,
Paul, do you still go?
Paul, you're muted.
I used to go regularly, but I haven't been going to the virtual meetings.
I
It's a
mean,
lot to sit through.
yeah, but should we assign somebody to cover that? I mean, we used to have it pretty well covered. I mean, you used to go, Narissa used to go, Rosemary used to go, and we were pretty well represented there for a while. I don't know, it did any good, but
well,
Do
Paul,
they get volunteer?
do you want to help? Want you want to help?
Yeah,
help you?
I'll go back to them if
well, I mean, I'm really asking a question rather than, I'm not exactly making a recommendation, but it does seem like, I don't know, Mike, is it useful for the council to have this committee, sort of up to date on a continuing basis with what goes on in JPB, or do you have other sources for that?
I don't think we have other sources until something actually happens, so we do get reports, but I think we'd get more if we followed it more closely, but it's asking a lot of the, volunteer committee.
It can be a whole day meeting. I've gone to a couple of them. Actually, this one in which they didn't have a quorum still lasted, I think, almost an hour, even though they didn't have a quorum, only because everyone wanted to make a statement about why they were going to leave and how this wasn't fair. And they took public. A lot of it is also taken about public comment, and then the public had their 2 cents in on how they felt about whether San Mateo should be paid back or whether people should have attended and things like that. So it's a real government meeting because the public can participate, which is can be positive, but also can really slow things down, and it can take the whole day.
that's
Well,
always
I mean,
been a problem. The public comments have always been a big piece of it. And it's the same people saying the same thing month after month after month.
Not like us.
Not like us, no.
Not like us.
The bicycle people are always there in force, as I recall.
Yeah.
So it's my take is, if anyone has, I would say they put out the agenda the week before usually, and if there's anything that catches someone's attention, they can watch the recording and just watch the section of interest. Most of it is, things that probably are not going to be relevant to Atherton ever. But if there's something of interest, that I would encourage, any member of the committee that, hey, just take a look and then report back if there's something interesting that happens. That would be great.
Do you or Robert or Mike or did somebody regularly get the agenda? I mean, I don't. I guess I can find them on the website and get the agenda, but I don't get it routinely.
You can subscribe to get a notification of when they post the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I had a few things I wanted to say. Oh, just one. One of the things on their agenda, I do look through it every once in a while, and one of the interesting things is also keeping track of how much ridership is coming back. And in the latest report they have from June, the ridership is still down 87 to 90%, which is not as bad as the 95% has been down during most of COVID, but it's still pretty low. And Caltrain says the recovery is much slower than other North American commuter rail lines because they have a high reliance on tech and white collar jobs, and a lot of those are still being done remotely. So they are not recovering very well from this, and they're probably hoping that they can get some more stimulus funds later on to push them through. They did get about 41 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, so that will tide them over a bit. But they're hoping the next stimulus fund, if it gets passed by Congress, that they'll get a bunch more so that they can sustain themselves for a while longer. Yeah. So anything else from anyone? If not, why don't we move on to high-speed rail?
Sure, this is going to be fairly brief. Last meeting, we got a good presentation from High Speed Rail on where things stand. As noted, they're still in the environmental process in the northern segment. They did release an amendment to the EIR that is currently out for review. It's a limited revision to the draft EIR and EIS for this San Francisco to San Jose section. And it includes a new design variant for the Millbrae SFO station and some additional analysis and mitigations related to recent changes to governing endangered species along the corridor. So that is out for review. There is a virtual community meeting scheduled for tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. if folks are interested in learning more about the design variant that they're proposing for Millbrae.
Public comments for that are due by September 8th. So
Well, I think the recall will have a dramatic impact if the governor gets recalled, because I think most of the candidates that are likely to take his place are very anti-high-speed rail. I don't know what they can do, but they can certainly try.
any other comments or questions? Okay, why don't we move on to 5E, recognition of Malcolm Dudley.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give a brief outline of some progress, and then I'll turn it over to the subcommittee to further discuss. And so wanted to say that the subcommittee has met to go over some potential means of recognizing Malcolm Dudley and his contribution to rail in the town of Atherton and to the town of Atherton in general. Some ideas were discussed, and I'll have the subcommittee members kind of go over what those ideas were. And I know that they've also been doing some research related to Malcolm Dudley and his accomplishments, and some notations that have been made and are publicly available. And I think that as discussions continue through the committee, there'll be some opportunity for the committee members to provide additional input and feedback, whether it's in the meeting or just separately passing it through me to the subcommittee to take that and dial it down a bit, dial it up into a formal recommendation that will come back. And so with that, I'll turn it over to subcommittee, which consists of Member Jones and Vice Chair Mulbeck.
This is Jim. I thought I was on this committee, but I never heard any invites to it, but
I'm sorry, Jim.
that's okay.
Paul or John?
Yeah, go ahead, John, you were starting.
Well, I've got some notes that I put together on sort of a chronology of Malcolm and the transportation issues, but Robert asked us to speak specifically to the alternative choices that we might have, and I'm not sure there were three, and it seems one was, just a simple statement from from the town acknowledging him and honoring him. And one was actually some sort of a display, perhaps in, I don't know, there's been some talk about using the reoriented station as a place to display accomplishments and awards for people who did a lot. And there was a third one that was somewhere in between that, maybe something in the history room of the Old Town Council. Have I got that right, Paul, Robert?
Yeah, that covers them. We discussed briefly the possibility of naming the station after him, but that was
Yeah.
dismissed.
Anyway, those were, and what I have done since, I went on the internet, of course, and Googled Malcolm Dudley transportation, Malcolm Dudley trains. And I found some stuff, there's some recent stuff, obviously, you know, his obituary and the almanac article on his death. But I also found stuff going back over 20 years. Something in 2000, which was the year he resigned from the council after having been on it for 24 years. And some event a couple of years before that, in 1996, I think there was an article from what was called Palo Alto Online Weekly Morgue News. That was another article that covered something that he'd done. And so I constructed sort of a chronology. And it started in London, actually. He was in the Navy and he was going to get out, and they asked him to be on some special organization dealing with European UK connections. And so he and Cosette lived in London for about 3 years around 1960. And I think based on conversations I had with him over the years, it was then that he really sort of became aware of and became enthusiastic about public transportation. I mean, he was a California kid, he was a car guy. But in London, you know, don't hop in your car and drive to work in London, even in 1960, very easily. So he learned about trains and transit and undergrounds and things like that. And he thought that was better than cluttering the world with automobiles. And you may recall that when he was there, he bought a Jaguar and drove that car until a year ago when he died. So he didn't clutter the world with automobiles. He lived it like he believed it. Then in this 1996 or 1998 article in the Almanac, the article started out with the phrase, for 22 years, he was interested in local transportation and traffic, and specifically talked about his involvement in paying attention to the way the Dumbarton Bridge was built, what effect the bridge was going to have on Atherton, and along with that, trying to get comparable amounts of money to improve mass transit to keep people off the freeways. An article a couple of years later starts out with the phrase, more than any single person, Malcolm Dudley was responsible for the fact that San Mateo County now owns the Caltrain corridor from San Francisco to Gilroy, and the trains are still running up and down the peninsula. He, about that time, stepped down after being on the San Mateo County Transportation Authority since 1989. And while he was on it, he had been, they say, the critical component in getting a 1/2 cent sales tax for transportation in 1988. Now, I don't really remember that. I mean, they're always looking for another 1/2 cent for something. You guys, Jim in particular, you probably remember, Greg, you probably remember that much better than I do. But
John, he used to say that Atherton paid $500,000 a year from that sales tax that he and somebody else got passed back. And I'm sure that's what.
Yeah, that's what it was about. There was an original plan on the authority, I guess, or some committee that was put together that was originally approved. There was a 7-member committee. Malcolm was on it. The vote in favor was 6-1 with Malcolm opposing. And when it went to a larger committee, it was defeated based largely on Malcolm's arguments. It said too much of the money was going to highways and not enough for trains and other public transit. And so when that was defeated, he set up a new committee and crafted a new plan, which passed. And Caltrain got half the money instead of the 15% they were going to get from the first plan.
John, can I interject a second?
Yeah.
Fill you in on some of that. As I recall, and I wasn't around here at the time, but I heard the story from Malcolm. I'm not sure what the committee was, but
It's
The
in this
cities-
article. I just didn't write it all down. We can.
okay, the cities in San Mateo County had voted, and maybe the county was also involved, to put this proposition on the ballot with whatever 80-20 or highways transit or 75 or 85-15, whatever it was. And he didn't like it. And he and the mayor of Burlingame, his name is Frank Pagliaro. I'd been Malcolm as the first one to post it, but he got Frank to join in with him. And they went around, this is the story he told me, and they appeared at every city council meeting on the peninsula, and convinced enough of them to rescind the last proposal and change it to 50-50 funding, 50% transit, 50% highways. So anyway, that's the story as I was told it from Malcolm.
Yeah, no, that's consistent with what was in this article that I was reading.
And,
And
and
they
that-
had other things in it. They said he was instrumental in the Bayfront Expressway and apparently the Marsh Road interchange. Apparently, the first design of the Dumbarton Bridge was going to spill all of the traffic off the bridge onto Willow Road in Menlo Park. He said this is a disaster. And he got it so that the traffic off the bridge was split. The article said 3 ways. I can think of really only 2 ways, but anyway, no, I guess it is. It's Marsh Road. It's
University.
University Avenue
University Avenue.
and Willow. So yeah, it's 3 ways.
Yeah.
And getting that happened apparently involved a lawsuit that Malcolm was a party to. Jim, you may remember this part too. Malcolm and a group called Citizens Against the Dumbarton Bridge filed a suit and apparently prevailed and got this 3-way distribution.
Yeah, I was told, again, it came from Malcolm, that there was a plan to divert 100% of the traffic through Atherton. Now, I'm not sure where it went, whether it was Marsh Road, whether it went, Atherton Avenue.
Let me interrupt you. I can tell you
Valparaiso.
exactly what the plan was. The
Okay,
plan was, this is one of the great things Malcolm did. The plan was to bring it up Marsh Road, up Atherton Avenue and connect with 280.
yeah,
That was-
okay.
That was the plan. And you're
And so-
absolutely right. I didn't
so-
mean that, but that's true.
So then on the city council, Malcolm had the council send out a survey to the citizens, asking them whether they wanted to file suit against Caltrans or not. And the citizens voted to do so. So that led to the lawsuit. And I guess they won the lawsuit, or Caltrans gave up or decided not to appeal or whatever. But at some point, Caltrans threw up their hands and said, here, you tell us where you wanted to go. And I guess that resulted in the 3-way split.
Yep, that's right. It's accurate. Yes.
There was a tidbit in the article, which I don't know exactly what all was involved, that said the Atherton Council refused to pay for the lawsuit. So I don't know who paid for it. Maybe Malcolm paid for it himself. Anyway, he was a supporter of putting trains back on the old Dunbarton Railroad Bridge. That's still being talked about, obviously. He retired from the council in 2000. And his sort of next stint, I guess, was the Rail Committee as presumably a founding member. And I don't know exactly when the Rail Committee was formed. My recollection is
2003.
I was going to say my recollection is that Rosemary got involved in around 2005 or 6, but it was formed.
Yeah.
in 3.
I formed it the first year that I was mayor, 2003.
Okay. Well, thank you. And he was, he did lots of things on the Rail Committee that I personally know less about than Jim or all of you who were on the committee for all those years. He was vigorous in his opposition to high-speed rail, obviously. But my last recollection of Malcolm in this whole transportation area, there was a committee meeting in which he and I and two others, I think Greg and Paul, voted against three other committee members to recommend to the council that they take the position that we wanted to not only keep the station in service, but to return it to the old full service. Now, we knew that was an untenable position going on, but we figured if the council didn't take that position, they wouldn't have much bargaining position with anything Caltrain wanted to do. So when the Caltrain, eventually the council came to the agreement with Caltrain that they came to and agreed to close the station in return for some of the things that we're getting from Caltrain. Now, Malcolm didn't like that. And at least two meetings that I was at, he advocated very strongly for the town to hold a special election of the voters of Atherton to overturn that decision, or to ask if they wanted to overturn that decision and maintain the station. Well, it was clear to all of us that this was going nowhere. And I think it was clear to Malcolm that it was going nowhere. But his belief that it should be done, and his belief, hope, I don't know, it would be successful, was vigorous. And it was inspiring to watch. It really was. That guy had his heart in this stuff. And so, I mean, that's the kind of story that I compiled from the chronology. I don't know how we use it in terms of any sort of recommendation to the council or statement from the committee. We can discuss that, but we got a lot of facts.
Why is it that we can't name the station area for Malcolm? Is it because it's Caltrain owned, or?
It's not that we can't. I mean, it would be a recommendation to the council. It would be up to the council.
Okay.
I think that would be meaningful because of his involvement way back in making San Mateo County purchase the right of way from Union Pacific. I mean, everybody knows Malcolm and I disagreed on both issues, and he and I both laughed about it privately and also in public. But that was one of the great things he did for this town. And I see no reason, any other transportation issues he's done, I think there's no reason we should not recommend that the station be named for Malcolm Dudley.
Well, as I understand it, what we're doing is formulating a recommendation to the council. And I think that the station naming quite obviously should be given full consideration among other options. Certainly with what John has collected on Malcolm's life history, we owe it to him to have a resume of his activities, either posted in the station or posted in the old council chambers. But there could be other things for us to consider.
Well, we could do a plaque that goes into more detail, rather than just a 12 by 8 or something, but something more larger that you could have the writing and maybe have a better story or a more detailed story. But I'm just throwing that out for suggestion.
Thing about plaques, I don't think people spend the time to read all the detail, and you make it too long and people just go, oh yeah, sure, right, and walk right by it. That's just my comment, but I think Malcolm needs to be duly recognized for all the 20 years and the work he did in this town and for this county. No question about it.
Oh, absolutely. And there's more to it than just transportation. I mean, I just called the transportation part out.
Yes, John, you're
Lots of
absolutely
other
right.
things.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
So I think what this committee is looking for, John and Paul, is your recommendation. And based on that recommendation, we can take a vote on how the committee feels.
Hey, Alex, one thing
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
one thing the committee should be aware of, and Robert, you're gonna have to help me out here, but the council appointed a council subcommittee to deal with the train station at a meeting, I think at our last meeting. And that subcommittee is Rick and Diana, I think. I mean, the mayor appoints these subcommittees. So whatever, there's got to be some link to them, because you don't want to have this committee making a recommendation and Rick and Diana doing something else, completely off track. We got to make sure that we're coordinated there in some way.
What was the purpose of the committee?
Robert, do you remember that subcommittee establishment?
Yeah, so initially, I think we had talked that the station was going to be one of the areas considered for Legends of Atherton. And then there was a committee that was formed to start talking about that. And as that idea ran its course and the council decided not to move forward with the Legends, the subcommittee is still there predominantly to work on what that station could be and how it can be integrated into the town center. And so I don't believe they've met yet on the topic.
I think they have, Robert. I think you got to be careful about that. I think they're actually doing stuff. So
then I'll have to check in with George.
yeah.
And since the item on today's agenda isn't an action item, it's more of providing feedback to the subcommittee and in which directions to gear efforts. I think that asking the subcommittee to continue the consideration of the naming, and I can work with them about potentially setting something up with the subcommittee to talk about what the ideas are, but I need to get additional feedback from the subcommittee as to what they're thinking on the building.
I mean, my take is a recommendation is just a recommendation. It's fine if the council says, we have some other ideas for how we want to, what we want to do with the station. And I don't think we're proposing what specifically has to go into the station. We're just saying perhaps the station should be there. We should have some recognition of Malcolm, and it could be many different things. I don't think we've picked any one thing, and it might be just the naming of the station, and then if the council wants to have some kind of exhibit, they can. We don't. It would be up to them if we do. But it's just a recommendation, and if they don't want to take it, that's their prerogative as well.
Yeah, Alex, my concern would just be, I think we want to, if this committee's going to have a meaningful recommendation, you want to get ahead of two members of the council making a recommendation. They should be aware that you're looking at it and thinking about it,
Sure.
What you're thinking. Because you don't want to go into a meeting where two members of the council are already invested with something, and then you make a recommendation that's somehow not consistent with that. And Robert reminded me, I had forgotten the way that came about. The subcommittee was originally established to look at the library in the administration building, the town hall, to talk about where we might put a Legend of Atherton's room, which was intended to be in a library initially. They didn't find room in the library, and they expanded to look at other places. They focused on the train station. I think the other three members of the council pushed back and said, no, the train station should be about the history of the train and not about just, the history of Legends in Atherton. And then somehow the subcommittee transitioned from Legends in Atherton to the train station.
Yeah,
So
I think part of it is also they got the 400,000 and they got the train station to be able to do something with it, as part of the agreement with Caltrain, and then the 400,000 to be able to spend in order to do something with it. So, okay, I mean, we can table the naming, but for now,
Okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
I just wanted to shoot my big mouth off again. Why doesn't the committee, either John or Paul, reach out to the council members and say, we'd like to get together and chat about what we think we do. That's a 10-minute, 15-minute meeting, and I think that's the best way to do it. If you guys don't want to pick up the phone, I'll pick up the phone and call Rick. I don't know the new councilwoman. I introduce myself at the Night of Atherton, but I'd be glad to call Rick if you guys don't.
Well, I think, as I said, I'm happy to try and coordinate that through the city manager.
Well, if you
And,
want to do it that way, but
I think the outreach should come from a citizen, even though with the city manager that helps, but it would still, it's our committee
Okay.
and we should be doing the outreach.
well, look, I mean, I have.
Mike,
I have-
you were nodding your head, yes, I think. Do you agree
Yeah, I
with
mean,
that?
my
approach?
only concern, I think I want to make sure you guys make contact sooner rather than later, because I would hate to have
Yeah,
this just opportunity slip by because we're following a slow process and other people maybe aren't. The only thing I would ask is if you guys reach out, please don't somehow screw me up with the Brown Act, because you now got 3 members of the council that know something. So please don't report back to me, okay?
Well, look, I mean,
You'll have to recuse yourself at the next meeting.
I have coffee with Rick. Not terribly often, but once a month, once every 3 weeks, maybe. I'm perfectly happy to call him up and say, hey, let's have a cup of coffee. If he wants to invite Diana, fine. And Paul, we can just get together and do it that way.
That's great, John.
do that. That's great.
Okay.
That sounds like it makes sense.
Okay.
We do have a recommendation.
Can I add 2 other comments?
Go ahead,
relating
Jim.
to Malcolm. Correct one inaccuracy in John's history there. My understanding, at one point, Malcolm attended the London School of Economics. It was part of his posting there to London. I'm not exactly sure how it fit in with the other stuff that John described, but he did. And when he was there, he met, I believe it was like a prince from Saudi Arabia or something, or some other Mid-Eastern country, who had a fleet of cars in London. He offered Malcolm a car at the end of when Malcolm was leaving. And he gave him his choice, and Malcolm tried to decline. He said, no, I got, all these cars here, by, 10, 20, whatever, take one of them. So Malcolm selected the Jaguar, which I think is probably about a 1950s version,
Yeah.
maybe something like that. That's where the Jaguar came from. He did not buy it.
Okay, I didn't know that. I just knew he had it. And the article said that he acquired the Jaguar. It didn't say it was a bribe from Saudi Arabia or anything.
He did acquire it.
How could you
That's
not
correct.
assume that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the other
that's
thing
a
I wanted
good
to
part.
mention is that there is a memorial. I sent this out to Robert and Helen earlier, hoping it would be distributed. I didn't see it come around. So
She'll get it out tomorrow.
it's on Sunday, August 22nd, from 2:30 to 4:30. So if Helen sends the whole thing out to everybody, that'll be great. It's at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Palo Alto. I just scanned the description of it, the announcement. And so if Helen sends it out tomorrow to everybody, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
For
a
sure.
good turnout from this committee would be a good thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There could be a cast of thousands. There should be a cast.
Well, there probably will be a cast.
And it's also, there's also a virtual version of it if you don't want to go in person.
Yeah, well, it's not that far.
It's not far. I think we should go in person.
I agree. I'll be there.
There's one other thing that I would inquire about. I was talking with Joan Sanders the other day. She'd worked with Malcolm a lot on the library, and she was also a neighbor of his over in Lindenwood. And I asked her if she had any sort of informal pictures that might be melded into some sort of display. And she said she didn't, but apparently one of Malcolm's daughters, I think her name is Virginia, but I'm not sure, is living with Cosette over in Lindenwood. And Joan recommended, and I think I will, just to call a number, ask to speak to Virginia. I think Cosette's a little difficult to talk to right now. But talk to Virginia and see if, they must have a closet full of pictures that might be appropriate. Something informal. We know all the pictures I've seen have been headshots, very formal looking. He always looks happy, but still, a picture of him sailing his boat or playing his, whatever the hell he played, his musical instrument, would be, something that could be melded into something like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would wait until after this memorial service.
Sure.
There's probably gonna be lots of pictures on display there. And Cosette, his widow, is pretty bad shape herself. I'm surprised that he went before she did. And she splits, I think that she spends some time at Virginia's house and Virginia spends some time so that at Cosette's house, so that she's got constant companions around the clock.
Yeah.
But, you know, Virginia has her own kids to get off to school and stuff like that. So she can't live full time at Cosette's house. So they go back and forth, I believe. In fact, I just, well, my wife just talked to Virginia today. And
Well, maybe you or Kathy ought to make this approach. I mean, I've never met Virginia.
sure, I think it'd be appropriate when we get to the point where we're discussing what we're going to do to honor Malcolm, or you know, when we know what we're going to do. And if we need some pictures, then we can reach out at that time, and it won't be a problem, I'm sure.
Okay.
It might be good when you talk to Rick, John, just to understand what, perhaps some parameters that the committee can work within, that so that doesn't conflict with what he and Diane are thinking about proposing.
Okay, well,
Okay. Any other comments? So I think we have some general direction where to go on.
Jim, do you want to confirm again, that's this Sunday at 4 o'clock?
No, it's I think it's a week from Sunday. It's the 22nd.
I think it's 2:30 to 4:30.
I think Helen is going to send out the
We'll get that sent out
pamphlet,
tomorrow.
right?
I got an invitation, but I can't find it.
Yeah, it's a week from Sunday.
And what is it? It's either 2 to 4 or 2:30 to 4:30. I can't. put my
It's
hand on my-
2:30 to 4:30, and it's an outdoor memorial celebrating his life.
At St. Mark's?
Yes. But that information should be coming out.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to 5F, mission of the Rail Committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This item was requested to be put on the agenda just to go over the mission and if there were any specific conversations the committee wanted to have as to how you all want to move forward with the charter. So attached to the agenda report was the resolution of the city council establishing and governing town committees. And within that, on page 7 of 12, item number 4, or committee number 4, is the rail committee. And I can read the few paragraphs to go over that if you'd like. And then after that, attached at the end is the council's rail policy issues attachment to the resolution.
Okay. So let me see this. We are supposed to, not an action item, it's just discussion of our roles and responsibilities. So I suppose, does anyone have any questions about our roles and responsibilities? Or perhaps how to fulfill our roles and responsibilities within the committee structure? Maybe that might be a more applicable thing to ask.
I think, let me just say a few words, because I think this item is on the agenda in large measure because of a comment I made at a previous meeting. And that comment was basically, what are we really doing? I mean, I've been on this committee very long. I inherited the Malvich chair from Rosemary, I guess. And I have two observations. One, the bulk of what I've done so far is to work with Robert and others on the committee to review environmental impact statements and business plans for Caltrain and high-speed rail. And I think we've done a conscientious job of that, and we've written up comments and we've sent them to the council. And the council has in fact incorporated these comments into letters. As near as I can tell, those letters are sort of routinely brushed aside with a comment, yeah, we've taken care of that. And so I don't know that that's a huge contribution that we're making. I don't think and I don't know that it could be in just doing that, because these things are anyway. I don't think our comments have had much of an impact on the way the world of transportation goes forward. The other comment that I would make is just looking back over the last hour of this meeting, except for the discussion that we had about Malcolm and a little bit about the station, most of the information has come from staff, from Robert to us, not from us to the staff and hence to the council. So, that's fine. But if all of that information was already in the hands of the people who needed it and were going to act on it, the fact that we were informed about it is nice, but I don't know that it represents much of a contribution on our part. So my question is, are there things we should be doing that we're not, that would be of value to the town? And one example of that is the question that I asked Mike a little while ago. Do you want us attending regularly the JPB meetings and keeping staff and indirectly council up to date on current interesting items? And the response was sort of, yeah, that might be useful. And I'm sure, there are other things we could think about. Should we be more involved? I don't know whether this is even possible. Should we be more involved in the design of the Watkins thing with design recommendations? Some of us have pretty extensive engineering background. Some of us have a pretty extensive train background. We may have some thoughts and some ideas. Should we be doing the sort of thing that Narissa used to do for the committee? Sort of keeping track of what's going on at the Federal Railway Administration in Washington. Keeping track of what's going on with, Beatty Balfour, or whatever they're called, in Denver, the problems they're having. And I just throw this out, but if these things would be useful, I would be willing to do some of them. I don't want to take on everything I just talked about, but my consulting business has dwindled away to a little glimmer. I'm living by myself. I'm sitting here. I can still think and drive. I can put some time in on this if it would be useful, or if it would be something that the rest of the committee would consider a contribution, not a contribution from me or whoever does this, but a contribution of the committee to the town.
So let me say this, John. I'm very open to anyone who wants to introduce items to the agenda. Just let me know a week beforehand, or actually probably better 2 weeks beforehand, because we kind of nailed down the agenda a little over a week before most of the time. And if there's some, like Narissa used to just do this on her own. No one appointed her to look into Denver. Nobody appointed her to look at quiet zones. She just kind of did it. And if anyone on the committee wants to focus on Caltrain, I know that Scott used to focus on the Dumbarton side of things, and that was his focus. I'm more than happy to just let someone run with it, whoever wants to volunteer for it, or share that responsibility with someone else and alternate. That's perfectly fine. But at the same time, I realize that we're all volunteers, so I don't want to force anyone to do anything that's kind of like a job.
I understand that, but it's one thing to say, yeah, if you want to go off and do something, do something. It's another thing if, as a committee, we made a little list of things we think ought to be done, and then somebody could say, yeah, I'll do it, or everybody would say, no, none of us wants to do it, and so it goes. But it seems to me maybe we should have a little list of things that we could keep track of, but I would like some confirmation from Robert or Mike or those of you with more experience that these in fact would be valuable contributions to the town, and not just something to fill up my afternoons.
So I'm gonna chime in, and I'm gonna say thank you, John. So as noted, historically, I'm going to say in the pre-COVID days, folks from the committee did regularly attend the JPB meetings and shared relevant information that was available from those meetings to the committee to keep the committee as well as staff informed of items pertaining to the town. I don't have the time to sit through the JPB meetings. As noted, they last several hours, but and so I'm sharing information that I get from staff, in particular as it relates to what I went over today, construction activities in the town. That the information that, for example, I think was shared by Roland through public comment last time was information that he gathered from both the JPB meetings as well as a following Public Records Act request or a public records request with regards to the constant warning system. And so I think that your point is well taken. I think there can be a list of items that there is some, say, whether or not it's follow-up or just monitoring of how things are going to be shared so that we can keep apprised so that as these things move forward through the town, we know how to deal with them.
Let me ask the committee, do we want to kind of formalize this a bit where we have different folks be responsible for specific areas? We could do that. I'm open to doing that.
Well, I think that the high-speed rail is going to be an issue. I mean, it's been around for a long time and it's going to continue probably for a long time. And I think it is going to have an impact on the town during the construction phase, if nothing else. And I just think that this committee should stay on top of that and be involved in it. And this committee was the one that initiated the lawsuit against the high-speed rail. And if we are not happy the way it turns out, in spite of what they told us, then I think we would be the driving force to work with the town council to do whatever we felt was appropriate to protect the town from the demise of the high-speed rail if it gets out of hand. And I still think when you run this trains through the station at 110 miles an hour, it's going to be a new world for Atherton. And I just, I'm not sure, what we can do about it, if anything, but I would certainly want to say that that's one area that we should stay on top of as a committee.
Are any of those lawsuits still in process?
Yes, there is a lawsuit still in process. The Community Coalition on High-Speed Rail, which I'm involved in, and the town of Atherton, some individuals, including Quentin Kopp, and I think maybe one or two other individuals, and then there may be some other entities involved as well. But there is a lawsuit saying that a state law that was passed years ago that tried to defer some of the high-speed rail funds to the bookends, Southern California, Northern California. The Northern California's portion was to Caltrain. We said that was illegal, and it was didn't comply with Proposition 1A, and that any using bond funds for something other than what was specifically in the Bond Act was illegal. It was Senate, AB 1889 was the name of the bill that litigation is specifically about. It's still dragging on. I think we've lost at the first level, but we're on an appeal in the third district, which is notoriously slow. In fact, somebody else sued the third district or brought a case before the California Supreme Court saying the third district is too slow and they ought to be told to reallocate their cases to other districts so they would happen faster. Anyway, we thought we were going to be on in August. Now it's looking like sometime later in the fall we'll get our hearing. we still feel strongly that the use of the funds just is not within what the voters approved, and they can't do it politically. Judges may feel that, well, that's what the administration wants. That's what a lot of the state government wants, is to spend the money this way. And in fact, it may make more sense to spend the money on local systems in Northern California and Southern California than to build some train track in the Central Valley that's going to go from nowhere to nowhere. But it's a clear violation of what we thought was the constitutional law. So if it ever makes it to the California Supreme Court, it's going to put them in quite a quandary, because they're not going to want to approve something that may be a great idea, but it would set a precedent for ignoring Bond X in the future. So, I mean, it's a really interesting case that is still out there. And going back a little bit, just on the history of the Rail Committee, the reason I formed it in 2003 was when I first started reading about high-speed rail. And I thought, well, we ought to pay attention to this and get involved. I naively was thinking at the time that one could easily build or underpasses or overpasses at all the existing crossings and so forth. And then, learn they're phenomenally expensive. They chew up enormous amounts of land. It would have a horrible impact all the way up and down the peninsula if they started doing things like that. So ultimately, we came out opposing high-speed rail. But in the process after the committee was formed, then we realized that Caltrain was an issue, because in 2004, the committee was formed in 2003. In 2004, Caltrain dramatically cut back the service to Atherton on the argument that it had to help enable the so-called baby bullet, which is nothing more than a sort of super express train, which they've had express trains as long as I've been here. And that was their argument. And then it was later on, and then of course, when they cut back service, that reduced the ridership at the station. And so then at a later point, they said, well, you're not using the station enough. We're going to knock out the week that, they left the very little weekday service. They knocked out the rest of the weekday service and just had the weekend service, which is sort of where they were at when we got to Exhibit 8 on the rail policy issues adopted by the town of Atherton, which I just took a look at. That was still written when we still had weekend service, and somebody ought to look to getting that revised, since we no longer have any service. Anyway, that's the history of the committee, and it's been involved in Caltrain issues as well as high-speed rail ever since.
So perhaps this is not an action item, so we can't take any formal action. But go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, no, I've been jotting down some notes, and we can certainly continue this conversation at the next meeting. And if there's a desire to make assignments at that meeting, we can do that. The items that appear to jump at the top of the list in terms of keeping an eye on things predominantly is high-speed rail, the JPB and Caltrain, the activities that are going on. But the key item related to that really is going to be the constant warning time and the testing and how that is progressing, and whether or not they're able to dial things down to minimize gate downtimes. Following that is the litigation aspects of the different lawsuits that are going on. And then potentially, but this is probably going to be more in my realm, in bringing information and receiving feedback with regards to the quad gates.
Jim, you had a comment?
Yeah, I have just one comment. My suggestion would be for Alex, to reach out, to John's point, to the council and see if there's anything that they want us to be looking at. I mean, talk to the mayor or talk to Mike privately and say, if the council have any points that they want us to look at, that's, that maybe would answer some of John's thoughts. Anyway, that's my last comment.
Hey, if I could on that, I've been very aware and thinking along the lines that John's been thinking about in terms of not just this committee, but other committees. where we have these really talented people who come together, and I feel like we're not really taking advantage of the committees. So I'll be very curious to see if we can figure out a way to get, to make better use of the committee without screwing up, the staff and the staff efforts and their specific ways, because that's kind of a concern. They don't want a bunch of people running around. So I look forward to talking to you guys about this over time. And if we come up with something that works for the rail committee, I would push it out. I also sit in the transportation committee, and they have the same exact issue in my view, that a lot of smart, talented people who don't, I think, question whether we're taking advantage of their skills and time. And I'm sure it's other committees as well. So anyway, thanks, John, for raising that. I'm going to follow this.
Yeah, thank you.
and try to push it. Yeah.
So a couple other areas that I think we should also keep an eye on are Dumbarton and our neighboring cities, Menlo Park, River City, what they're doing. So what I think I'll do is for our next planning meeting for, when is that going to be, October, is I'll discuss with Mike and Robert in terms of categories of areas the rail committee could look at, different areas like HSR, Caltrain, JPP, Dumbarton, neighboring cities, and then we'll see if one or more people want to take on just focusing on one or more of those areas, and then they can come back. We'll have that on the agenda and see if there's any updates that we can discuss or make recommendations to council or whatnot. Does that sound like a plan that you guys might want to try out?
That sounds reasonable.
And no one's obligated to take anything, we're all volunteers, but if there's something you guys are passionate about, like Narissa was passionate about the quiet zone, then more power to you. No one's going to stop you, and we want to hear what you have to report every couple months. Yeah. Okay. So I think we have a good plan. So think about what you guys want to do, what areas of interest, and then we'll parcel that out in October. Okay. Any other comments for 5F?
Well, I'm not sure what item we're on right now. Are we on 6 or?
We're on 5F right now, but I'm right about to go to 6 if there's no comments left on the mission of rail committee. Seeing none, Greg, did you have a comment for 6?
Once the high-speed rail is in force and it's running, I don't know whether it gets up to 4 or 8 trains an hour. What is the right number there? Is it 4 or 8, John? Do you know? Or
I think it's 4 each way, but something like that.
4 each way?
I think so, yeah. So if you're talking about gate downtime, for example, it's 8.
I mean, after the first month of operation at full service, 4 trains each way at 110 miles an hour, there's going to be a revolution on the peninsula that will far exceed Atherton, because it's going to cause delay.
Yeah, I did a paper on that 3 or 4 years ago, checking the current operations of some of the grade crossing gates and extending that into what impact the high-speed rail would have on that, and the impact on downtime is tremendous. It will.
I just don't know what, I just think we should be aware that that's a real high risk, and it's not going to happen. I don't know what may not happen for 12 years, 2030 or whenever they're finally going to get going. So maybe
Well,
academic for this group, but
This ties into the constant warning time issue as well, because their current idea of having fast and slow trains governing the advanced warning time is not going to work, because they're going to get a whole spectrum of different speeds, and this will impact the whole operation, and that I think is going to blow up before they ever get it going. That's a personal opinion, not.
well, I think that if it's, I don't want to say one way or the other whether it's going to happen or not, but if there is a Republican that gets in to be governor next month, then I certainly will get involved in the high-speed rail discussion. And I'm not sure how or what, but that there will be I'm sure there'll be a concerted effort to do something, but I don't have a clue what.
Well, I also read something, this has nothing to do with Newsom, but apparently the Biden administration is not terribly interested in California high-speed rail. They're turning their attention to the Northeast Corridor. Now, I don't know what effect that will have on a California high-speed rail, but that was,
Oh, that's been a Washington thing right along.
yeah.
California has been, and also they've gotten some money and some cooperation, but the real focus of the Congress has been on the Northeast Corridor.
It seems the speaker would have the leverage to do whatever she wanted or thought needed to be done, especially if she loses control next year, which is likely.
She supports high-speed rail, Craig.
But
And she supports high-speed rail, but
well, I know, but she's got to take a more proactive if they're going to keep the funds coming from the federals. That's all.
I mean, it's not clear that her help is going to go in the direction that we want it to go.
Well, the Congress is considering a very large stimulus package. So
Yeah.
that might be all roll, and there's a big transportation component to it.
Right, and there's
So
a
that-
big rail component within
Yeah.
that.
So there's so much money that some of it could come to HSR to keep it alive for until the next stimulus comes and the next recession, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like the tale of HSR. Wait for the big pots of funding every 10 years or so it comes around. I had a few updates just on neighboring cities. Redwood City is, they're doing some grade separation planning for a Whipple at least, but they want to do, they're just going to look at conceptually if they could grade separate all of their grade crossings, and they're going to have their analysis of what they might do conceptually by the end of this year. So that's coming down the end of this year. Caltrain is also releasing their Redwood City Transit Corridor Plan at the end of this year. So that will be, those two will be interesting, and it's probably very likely that the area around downtown is going to be grade separated just because they want to put in 4 tracks, a passing track, and they need to be able to have that grade separation there, rebuild the station, probably move it 1 block north. So we'll see that coming off. And in fact, the Caltrain, Redwood City, and the owners of some property have near the Caltrain station in Redwood City have swapped around their property so that it will allow Caltrain to build their station north and to build four sets of tracks around that area. So that'll be coming up soon in the end of the year. In terms of Menlo Park, they've put in their budget. They're going to now analyze doing quiet zones for all their at-grade crossings. So that's just money to study that they're going to do quiet zones. Whether they're going to actually do it, what's involved is going to be still open. But they're making their way toward doing quiet zones as well to at least take a look at it. And they budgeted for that for this current fiscal year.
Has Menlo Park given up on their grade separations? That's gone up and down and back and forth a number of times.
I think there's some folks that are still hoping that they can do some, but I mean, I guess they could. I've heard there was some money budgeted to do a study of grade separations. At the same time, they're spending some money to study quiet zones in which they keep those at grade crossings. But the funding to do that, there's 4 at grade crossings. To grade separate them all is going to be very expensive. And for one city to get all those funds, it's going to be hard. So yeah, I don't know. And Menlo Park's doesn't have the heft of San Francisco, so it's they don't have enough representation to be able to pull in that much from the state or from the federal government. So it'll be hard for them to do anything economical. But it doesn't stop people from trying, I guess. And then the last thing was something that Greg mentioned earlier tonight was the San Jose doing a quiet zone. So That was on the that's on the Union Pacific Warm Springs Railroad corridor, what they're doing. And right now they're planning to do a partial quiet zone in which it sounds like they have some temporary structures at night where they're going to close off the stations, sorry, not the stations, the crossings, so that they can have that quiet zone at night so that those residents can have some sleep, and then they'll reopen them during the day. But they do have a plan for more permanent funding, but that's going to take quite a bit more money. Right now, they've secured $8 million in state funds. And that's the article that Greg shared that earlier, about a month ago. And, but they need a lot more money in order to pay for the permanent quiet zone for all the grade crossings they have through this neighborhood. So they're working on it they're getting some money from the state. It's part of the governor's $100 billion spending plan to give San Jose some of that money. But they're going to need more from the federal government before they can actually do it all. So that's kind of all things that I have new to report. Any other? Go
I
ahead, Jim.
just noticed that Helen Luo did send out the copy of the memorial announcement for Malcolm Dudley.
Okay.
Just
There's no more.
what happened on item 1? I assume we reelected the 2 chair and the vice chair.
Yes.
Wasn't that surprising, Greg?
You want to put my vote in there, or was there a vote taken?
Yes, there
Yes.
was a vote taken. There was a unanimous selection of the chair and the
I
vice chair.
put my name to that.
Oh, thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
Item 7, public comment, seeing none. Future agenda.
Hold on a
items.
second. I just
Oh.
got a notification from Roland trying to get into the meeting.
Okay.
So he's joining us now.
Okay.
Who is that?
Roland.
Ron.
I see someone dial in, but they're muted.
Roland, you can unmute yourself if you want. We are actually on item 7.
Yeah, this is Roland.
Public comment.
I'm good. I'm good now. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Roland. You have the floor.
No comment. I just couldn't get in the meeting. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're about at the tail end of the meeting, that's all. Okay, if there's no public comment, we'll move on to item 8, the future agenda items. So certainly we'll have the Atherton Station repurposing on the future agenda, and we'll also include this, I guess, mission of the rail committee item.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
continue that for our next meeting as well. Are there any other future agenda items that people want to bring in October?
Does there have to be sort of a continuing item on Malcolm Dudley?
Sure, yeah. If you guys will be ready to talk about that, we'll include.
I think we should put in a holding on the election. If the governor does get recalled, we should discuss the impact. And if he doesn't, then we can just delete it.
Okay, I will, if, we'll have, well, it may be fair to say that the normal agenda items of high-speed rail and Caltrain will kind of cover that already. If events in the next 2 months change to affect those, we'll probably discuss those anyway. Right? Because those are ongoing agenda items, HSR and Caltrain. Okay. No other items. Next meeting will be October 5th. Hope to see all of you there. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.